Okay, guts.
It says Youri is recording the call at top, so I think we're ready to go.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And joining me today is Sakura Saunders. Sakura is an American Canadian based in Nova Scotia, and she is a longtime activist, part of the Mining Injustice Solidarity Network, the
Mm-hmm.
Beehive Collective, and protestbarrick.org. And yes, it's our All Things Canada edition. And yeah, very excited to get the chance to speak to her. So yeah, let's get into it. So first off, Miss Saunders, thank you so much for joining me today on a Sunday and taking the time off of your busy day to come on. But but you're also a member of World Beyond War, right? Like a board member of World Beyond War, right?
Yes, I am. I'm involved in lots of different activist projects. Part of it is because, well, I'm an activist. I'm compelled by everything, and I think a little part of it also is that I am not allowed to work in Canada because I'm just here on a visitor's visa, and so I busy myself, working with all of these different organizations, and um, it's just like me and my partner used to do a lot of volunteer work, and now that we have a job, he has a job. um I do lots of the volunteering for both of us.
Okay, well, we'll definitely get into that. And folks, help Sakura get her Canadian passport so that she can actually so that she can do both her activism and work to pay the rent. So, all right. So my first question I'd like to ask you is, give us an overview on the mining industry, because I've heard many times from frequent past guests on this program, like Eve Angler, Jay Watts, formerly of the Central Organizer of the Communist Party of Canada, and others involved in people power movements in Canada and Australia, about the evils of the mining industry. So give us an overview of the mining industry, its role in Canadian domestic and international affairs, and its impact on the climate crisis.
Sure. Well, I mean, I first started kind of getting obsessed with the mining companies and the mining industry when I was working for corpwatch.org. And so it's a journalist organization kind of tasked with watchdogging all corporations, which is this ridiculously huge task. And one of my tasks at Corp Watch was I had to find all of the different articles of corporations doing bad things around the world that were not written by us, and you know put it on our website and sort it into issue area and geographic area. And every time I saw a mining story, it was so often the same story. It was typically a central government making deals with these transnationals to just sell out their rural and indigenous people. I mean, it was just awful stories of people just having no power in the situation. Often the mine sites were militarized, and then in 1 year of working for Corp Watch, I worked there for like 3.5, 4 years. So in 1 year, I met 3 different communities, all impacted by, or community representatives, all impacted by the same company, Barrik Gold. And it was headquartered in Canada, and that's kind of how I got involved with my advocacy. At first, I took a different job closer to Canada so I could go over every 3-day weekend. So I was working in Philadelphia when I co-founded the Mining and Justice Solidarity Network, which is in Toronto, where many of these corporations are headquartered. And it's just the power imbalance is kind of across the board. And it's rife with abuse. If it's not the militarization of mine site, it's a corruption of politicians, and it's always the devastation of the environment. And that's the key issue, I would say, that leads to all the other ones, right? So if you have a project that's going to massively dewater the local streams, massively pollute the air and water, be responsible for huge blasts that are going to, if there is anyone living close by, create huge cracks through the walls of people's homes, like gigantic cracks. The local community isn't going to want it, right? And so I think that that's what is kind of the root issue that causes all these other issues, right? Like, political corruption or militarism, right? I mean, you get a local police or a militia hired to stop any local resistance against the project. And so I think it definitely depends on what country the mine is hosted in, whether the kind of repression is more of a legal repression or a very very physical violence, whether it's targeted assassinations or just more generalized violence. But mine sites usually come with just a situation where the local community is not very empowered. I'll just say that it's hard to completely generalize these things. But with protestbarrick.net, which is what our website was for many, many years, what we did was we took one mining company and we looked at every single one of their operations. Like I had at one point I had been to like I think over half of Barrick's operations personally, and but the website itself had like over 2,000 articles of Barrick doing bad things around the world. And like Corp Watch, I would sort them from issue area and geographic area, and I kind of just took the world's at the time the world's largest gold mining company to show that it wasn't a case of a few bad apples, but these issues are very systemic.
And well, that was actually my second question, which is talk to us about that major Canadian mining company known as Barrik Gold and the legacy of the late Peter Munk, and actually talk to us about the very criminally overlooked country of Papua New Guinea and Barrick's and Barrick's impact on that country and any other that comes to mind when one speaks of Barrik Golds.
Sure. Well, in Papua New Guinea, the oh gosh, that mine has had so many different issues from the environment. They practice riverine tailings disposal, which is illegal in like every country in the world, with the exception of Papua New Guinea. And they have the Red River that they just dump the mine waste directly into because the highlands, the geography is such that they can't make a tailings dam. Usually there is a tailings dam that you use the water.
And what's a tailings dam?
It's so when it holds wastewater, and one of the good things about holding the wastewater is that means you can reuse the wastewater over and over again. Of course, it gets more and more disgusting, and tailings dams have their own issues, right? Like for example, the North Mara mine in Tanzania, the tailings dam is leaching toxins into the environment constantly, and it's not lined. And Barrick said the most ridiculous lie, that the villagers were stealing the lining. And this thing is like a lake, so if there ever was a lining, you really couldn't get much other than like the very, very surface part of it, right? Like it was just such a ridiculous lie that would be so apparent to anyone that actually visited the tailings dam, and yet they just say it anyway. But anyways, going back to Papua New Guinea, that's actually one of the first mines that I got involved with. I met the ex-president of the Mine Workers Union, Stanley Kaka, at a AMARC conference, which is a radio conference that I was at in Indonesia. I was there, in the region doing some Corp Watch business. And me and him were on the edge of our seats talking about Barrik Gold. And, he said that he had become the president of the union, but then he kind of had this insight about the environmental impacts, realizing that Barrick was just going to pick up and leave at some point and leave a horrible situation for everybody, and and that's why he got involved. And then once he got involved, he was shot at, and typically I would say the kind of violence within Papua New Guinea is not targeted. though there has been times when we suspected definitely targeted retribution, for example, for one of the advocates that was going overseas to advocate against the mine. But for the most part, I would say that's a mine site that has a lot more generalized violence. Because just of the situation where you have a bunch of people that are armed and a bunch of people that are not armed. There's a lot of sexual violence, like gang rape, that has happened there. And that was one of the biggest controversies that Barrick was involved with, where we had been bringing landowners from Papua New Guinea for years to the annual general meetings, and they would say that the guards were raping their women. And I remember, I believe it was Peter Munk, but it might have been some other executive within Barrick was saying, how could you even make that it's like disgusting that you even make that accusation, as it's untrue, kind of throwing it back in our face and, acting disgusted that we would sink so low to make some sort of accusation like that. And eventually, this is after Harvard Law was on the case, after all of these different NGOs like Mining Watch, Mineral Policy Institute, Amnesty International, were kind of ringing the bells on this ongoing and systemic human rights abuses that were very just the graphic stories that came out of there just, make you shudder. So after all of this, Human Rights Watch gets on the case, and they're a slightly more conservative human rights organization, I would say. I don't. They just
that's another statement, but yeah, I can go. But yeah, we can go with that.
Okay. Well, sure. Anyways, they're a little bit more aligned, I guess. They're in the voluntary principles with Barrick, right? Within the UN. And part of the voluntary principles is that you have to agree to an investigation if one is demanded of you. And we've been demanding one for a long time, but all of a sudden Human Rights Watch asks for it. And Barrick, acts as if they've never been accused of this in their life and says, oh, of course we'll do an investigation. And then, lo and behold, there is a lot of evidence that a lot of their employees are repeat offenders, right? They're coming up in lots of these different cases. And so finally, they were backed into a corner and they had to do something about it. And then this is kind of, it's not a happy story, because this is just a story that shows you how impune these mining companies are, right? So they're responsible for this human rights crisis over many years that they ignored. And then they finally get caught, and or years after they got caught, they finally get held to it, and they end up compensating 119 women and girls for gang rape, with about $10,000 each.
Wow.
And
that's incredible. Wow.
Yeah, that's nothing, right? That is what, a couple hours of their profit. In the context of this, multi-billion-dollar company, trying to escape a human rights crisis like that. And then, so a handful of them sued. They said that accepting that money would be like accepting lollies for what happened to them, lollipops. And so they sued and got an out-of-court settlement. And then Barrick went around and gave maybe 8,000 or 9,000 more. I don't remember the exact number, but to all of the 119 women and girls. Still nothing. And they had made all these promises, and they were going to make this grievance mechanism, so that people can continue to come. And, obviously, this all happened pretty quickly, this investigation and everything. They weren't going to have gotten everybody that was negatively impacted by this. And, and that's an ongoing issue too, is because there's still people who, have lost people to either murder or, been sexually assaulted there, and, suffered the consequences socially for that, because it's a very, stigmatized thing to go through. And they're not getting, their cases aren't moving forward within, Barrick's so-called grievance mechanism. So, they made this big hoopla, even got the John Ruggie involved, with kind of giving the stamp of approval to this grievance mechanism, and it's just hasn't really done anything. Though there has been, I would say, less cases, but there still has been cases, in recent years. That is, more of an improvement. But, overall, it's really a case study, in how impune these mining companies are.
And do you know anything about if Barrick Gold has any operations in Congo or South Africa that you can enlighten us about?
They have an operation that I know almost nothing about, in Congo. Like, I don't know if it's if it's because, it's a legacy thing, but I'm sorry, I can't say that I know much about what's happening in their operations there, unless I have a contact on the ground. Then, all I can do is repost news articles, right? And for any campaign that I take on and I actually do advocacy around, is because I have that contact on the ground, or I've been there myself, and it's not even just about having a contact on the ground, because you could have someone telling you anything, right? So either myself or somebody that I really, really, really trust has to actually go there. And I funded people to go to places like that I have never been, that still I have good connection with, because I've helped other people go there. So, like, for example, the Dominican Republic. I have never been to the Pueblo Viejo mine myself, but I have several of my, who I would consider actually close friends and colleagues, that have gone there many, many times, and so they report to me. Similar with Peru, I would say I've never visited any of Barrick's operations in Peru, but I have a close colleague that went to the mine site and did a lot of interviews. Um, and it's a similar kind of ethic that we have within MISIM, that, sure, we could repost articles on Twitter or social media, and that is very, very valuable. Taking advantage of the wealth of journalism that's out there. But unless we have some sort of independent reference on the issue on the ground, we're not going to really take on much advocacy. We're not going to organize protests or anything like that. We need that independent reference, to verify, and it's kind of an ethic that I picked up while I was working at Corp Watch, which is an investigative journalism outfit.
No problem. But any other parts of the world that Barrick engages in these human rights abuses that you're stunned doesn't get the international coverage it deserves, let alone the international solidarity it deserves?
I mean, nothing gets the coverage it deserves in Canada, but I've been doing this for 15 years, so there is, most of the cases have had their day in the sun.
Yeah.
So for example, North Mara in Tanzania. That is horrific. And it's ongoing. If you look at the stats, um, hundreds of people are impacted by this violence, or have been impacted by this violence in deep ways. Like, I think it was 165 murdered within a certain time period. I would have to look up the exact stats, but and so there has been times where that has gotten the attention because, for example, once there just happened to be a freelancer for the Toronto Star that just happened to be in Tanzania when there was a massacre at the North Mara site. And this was the kind of horrific one where Tundu Lissu, who was at that point a member of parliament, and a human rights lawyer, and he had been working, on those mines, North Mara, Bulyanhulu, etc., before he had become a member of parliament, when he was just a human rights lawyer working for LEAT, and which was like the Lawyers Environmental Action Team, I believe is what it stood for. So, it was this fantastical story almost of him going there and wanting to have an open cast ceremony, and they were going to have this large kind of public wake for the people that had been killed, and the police were like, "No, you can't do that." Um, and so Tundu heard rumors that they were going to steal the bodies so that they wouldn't be able to have an open cast kind of funeral for them. And
for workers that died in like mining related accidents or died
the
from
people
exposures.
in North Mara, Tanzania. So I would say about 50,000 people, according to the mining company that was there before Barrick was there. 50,000 small scale miners were economically displaced to create the Bulyanhulu, or to create, sorry, the North Mara mine. And so there's this situation there where people go to the waste rock, and they kind of scrounge the waste rock there, and they make these deals with guards to let them. And then sometimes disputes come out with the guards and they get shot at. And so they're literally, just digging through low grade waste piles. And this is the context in which most people are killed there. And anyways, there's been several moments where there's been like multiple people killed on the same day, and this was one of them. And anyway, so Tundu found out about this and decided that he was going to get a group of people together, lawyers, journalists, and they were going to kind of spend the night at the morgue to watch the bodies to make sure that they didn't get stolen. And then the police came in and kind of roughed them all up. Tundu said he was lying on the ground. They like had him on the ground, and someone had a boot on his face and a boot on his legs, another boot on his body somewhere. And then they threw him into the cell, and there was blood on the walls of the cell. And it just sounded awful. And I was like, how could they do that to you? And lots of this, not all of this story, but lots of this story actually made it out into the press in the Toronto Star. Barrick's body snatchers is what we were calling them, because they took the bodies and then just dumped them in body bags on the side of the road next to the families' houses. Like, it was just like awful. Anyways, and I asked Tundu, I was like, how could they do this to you? I mean, not only are you a lawyer, but you're a member of parliament. And they're like, exactly. He was like, exactly. They did it deliberately to me so that they could send a message to everybody else. If I can do this to Tundu, think of what we can do to you with no name.
Oh, Jesus Christ, that's unbelievable. And then briefly, if you can, respond to this, yeah.
Sorry, I forgot that I went on this tangent. I didn't even answer your question. I would say that not covered hardly ever is, or in any critical sort of way, are the issue in Dominican Republic. I would say that issue gets a lot of coverage locally within the Dominican Republic, gets like zero coverage elsewhere, except for, bizarrely, one time The Economist wrote an article about it. That was like kind of right on, and so that was very bizarre. But that's definitely a case study that I've been trying to get more media coverage of, and it's just been really frustrating. Like, I've offered to pay to get journalists there, and they've been like, I'm not allowed to take money from you. And I was like, well, you can talk to Barrick once you're there. Just also talk to my people. And and they were like, I can't do that. Like, I'm not allowed to. And I just thought that was so interesting because the reason they don't cover it, it's just a catch-22. They don't cover it because they're not there. And they won't go there because their newsroom doesn't have budget to send somebody. But they won't take my money to go there because that's somehow unethical. I'm like, hey, I'm not even getting paid for this shit. Like, I just, I'm good at raising money for things, and this deserves to be covered more. And I have a lot of stories like that. A lot of stories of trying to pull teeth to get people to cover what are obviously good journalistic stories and just hitting a wall.
Before you talk about a chapter in the book that you contributed, then briefly, if you can you respond then? How how has corporate media been covering corporate abuses overseas in the mining companies and the issues that your organization has brought awareness in and directed people against? Because the CBC, they have programs like the Fifth Estate, which sometimes or oftentimes, if one watches them, they do pretty good hard-hitting stories on what's happening in Canada and sometimes around the world. And surely, regardless of whether one likes the editorial positions of the Globe and Mail and other major newspapers, corporate newspapers in Canada, they must be covering some of the terrible human rights abuses mining companies are engaged in. Because, I mean, come on, even the New York Times and all of those outlets that we don't like in the United States, but even they have to every now and then cover some major corporation, engaging in human rights abuses. Because, just because. I mean, they are journalism outlets. So, respond to that if you can about Canada then.
Sure. I mean, like the Globe and Mail, I would say Jeffrey York's done a pretty good job actually of covering stuff at the North Mara mine in Tanzania. Though I really don't like the guy. Well, what he did to me in particular, because he had me doing hours and hours and hours of research for him for this one story, and I was so happy to do so. In fact, I was making plans to see him when I went to Tanzania, because I was going to be in Tanzania in like a few months.
Yeah.
And I thought this guy was really on side, and I had just written him story article. I sent him article after article about how Barrik could not be trusted, this and that. And then he quoted me saying, even social justice advocate Sakura Saunders thinks that Barrik is quote unquote more transparent than most other mining companies. And it was within this very like context of us, I believe, talking about Barrick's like greenhouse reporting, a greenhouse gas reporting or something like that. But I remember this conversation, and I even made comments that you couldn't trust it because it was from Barrick, but like at least they have this data, and I just couldn't believe it. He gave me a 2-word quote, and he called me social justice advocate and not editor of protestbarrick.net. Right? Like,
Okay.
I was like, you did me dirty. And then I wrote the Globe and Mail, and they wouldn't edit it out. I was just like, take that out. That is complete. If I did say those 2 words, that is completely out of context. I could send you all of the emails that I sent him. I had, documentation of this whole thing I wrote about like how Barrick couldn't be trusted because, here's an example of them being caught. You know,
Actually, no. Unfortunately, the Globe and Mail is behind a paywall. So even if you could send me, the article, I would have to pay the Globe and Mail in order to
Oh,
read
no, you
it.
can
But
find it on protestbarrick.net. Don't worry.
okay,
I pay the
perfect.
paywall so others don't have to. And protestbarrick.net still exists as an archive of thousands of articles about Barrik Gold. But anyways, I'm just saying that he did me dirty. I eventually actually had to threaten to sue for libel and defamation because I was like, this is actually like against my character for you to say that I said this, and it's going to impact my ability to work with people against Barrick. I had to like threaten to sue just to get a rebuttal, just to get a letter to the editor. Like I wrote a demand. I had lawyers, my lawyer friends, write a demand letter and everything. It was ridiculous. But anyways, but that aside, he's done a pretty good job of covering stuff at North Mara, and what else? CBC has been like the worst. Those places
The
like
worst in not covering, stuff like Barrick Gold's abuses and
oh
other.
yeah, I mean, like As It Happens did some good coverage. Um, when we had like pictures of like of houses being burnt in Papua New Guinea, like on fire, as it was happening. So, I mean, when we had the smoking gun, we had just started the Barrik tour with representatives from Papua New Guinea, and they were getting these images live. And so we just like sprung to action and got them on CBC. That was great. But get this, like CBC didn't cover it when the chairperson of the Landowners Association in Papua New Guinea spoke out at Barrik Gold's AGM. And that AGM was held in, wait for it, CBC's headquarters in Toronto. They hosted it. And it was only later that I found out that Vince Borg who was the VP of communications for Barrik Gold, was actually married to Amanda Lang, who was supposed to be like the liberal person on Lang and O'Leary. Like she was supposed to be the liberal counterpoint, married to an executive VP from Barrik Gold, which is just like one of the most needlessly brutal corporations for something that we don't need, which is gold.
Wow.
Anyways, and I also heard from several reporters that Barrik threw the best media party. Just lavish.
So that kind of explains why, even though you would think, oh my gosh, we're journalists, it doesn't, we're journalists, and we're journalists, we should be covering like, Canadian human rights abuses and corporations and whatnot. But I think all of what you just said kind of explains why, yeah, CBC and corporate media don't go after these mining companies as much as they should, given that they're Canadian, right?
Oh yeah, it's and another thing that like it's not even corrupt, but it's just gross. So one of my good friends, her sister was a business writer. I'll just say it, for the Globe and Mail. Anyways, she said that her editors wouldn't let her do mining abuse stories because because it happened so often that it was bare like abuse at a mine site that it wasn't a news story. So I'm getting this story a little bit through telephone, right? Because I didn't hear it directly from her mouth. I heard it from her sister's mouth. But, it just shows you, how systemic these issues are. And then, just, what do they call it? Compassion fatigue?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
There's probably a little bit of compassion fatigue going on with reporters that are aware of these issues. That they would probably just take it as an assumption that everybody knows that mining companies are really, really awful and they don't cover the abuses. When I personally think it's systemic abuses that should get the most coverage so that we can change the system, right?
Yeah.
And something that would radically change the system, but not completely, right? Because this would only kind of help going forward, would be free, prior, and informed consent, requiring free, prior, and informed consent. And I would say, requiring consent on a continuous basis, so, checking in for reviews every 5 years or 10 years, in terms of renegotiating those contracts. I would say hopefully 5 years, but, it just getting it at the even very beginning is just so far away from what current practice is right now. And this right to free, prior, and informed consent is so intuitive that I don't think that most people that aren't in it know how much it would radically change the industry.
And well, I got three very brief questions left, which I'm going to try to combine because you have another appointment to get to. So then talk. Okay, so then just in order for us to like get through them, talk to us briefly then about this new book that you contributed a chapter to about the mining industry, capitalism and dispossession, corporate. Moments. Yeah, capitalism and dispossession, corporate Canada at home and abroad. What's your chapter about?
Yes, so I wrote my chapter about something that kind of boils my blood. And no matter how many times I've told the story, it just still really gets me. Anyways, it's about all the Weasley things that the Canadian government has done and aided by Canadian institutions such as the University of Toronto have done to make it so that Canadian mining companies continue to be impugned. There's no even light measure of accountability when it comes to Canadian mining companies being responsible for human rights abuses abroad. And it's a story that I first engaged with personally back in 2006 when fresh from I sent a reporter, a very good friend of mine, to Papua New Guinea, raised all this money to send him there for I don't know, weeks, and he did all these interviews, and I transcribed all the interviews and put them into the national roundtables on the extractive industries. And so these were these kind of public forums, and then they also had this kind of closed door element to them. And I participated in these public forums, which, funnily enough, the press was barred from. So people could go, like anyone from the public could go to these forums where people were talking about the impacts of Canadian mining, and there was mining companies presenting, and there was NGOs presenting, and academics presenting, and people would bring people from impacted communities to present, or in my case, I just typed up the testimony and explained what the testimony, summarized what the testimony was saying, and included the typed up just primary resource document on how mining had changed the lives of people in Papua New Guinea. And anyways, this was a time of a lot of hope because, the government was acting on this, and there was these kind of closed door meetings with mining companies and civil society organizations like Mining Watch Canada and the Halifax Initiative and other organizations. And it actually produced this consensus document talking about what recommendations civil society and mining companies could agree on moving forward. And one of these things was a ombudsperson to investigate allegations of abuse. And the idea was this ombudsperson would initially they would eventually create, through this process of investigation and everything else, these standards which would be binding. So human rights standards, environmental norm standards that would be binding for mining companies to have to follow. And during this time, when 1 month before the consensus document was released, there was this new organization that was founded called the Devonshire Initiative, named after Devonshire Place, where the Munk Center for International Studies was headquartered at the University of Toronto. Munk, of course, as we've already established, being the then chairman and founder of Barrik Gold.
Peter Munk, yeah.
Peter Munk. And so this Devonshire Initiative was definitely a kind of parallel process that was meant to undermine the roundtables. And I say that because it was mining companies working with NGOs, but not the civil society NGOs that were engaged in the roundtables process, but these development NGOs, the majority of which took funding from Barrik Gold. And they were kind of take a different take on how to help people next to Canadian mine sites. And Harper, who was in power at the time, never responded to the roundtables report, which was actually supposed to be the government report. So the roundtables report was supposed to be the report. But instead, something like 2.5 years later, he released his own report called Building the Canadian Advantage. And this is why this story is so devastating to me, because what was proposed was a baby step forward. I mean, come on. It was what mining companies and civil society could agree on, right? This wasn't like justice. This wasn't going to be radical change. This was going to be, just staving off the worst of it, right? Just dealing with the worst cases. And here Harper was, after taking this baby step forward, what we all thought was a baby step forward, taking 4 steps back. And so he released the report, Building the Canadian Advantage, a CSR strategy for the international extractive industries. And to summarize, it was basically like, oh, yes, there's a problem with Canadian mining abroad. They're just obviously not good at communicating how great they are for local communities. And so we should put money into helping these companies not only do good work, but also publicize how great.
Oh my God. You've
Yeah.
got to be kidding me.
Yeah. I mean, I crashed a meeting at the Organization of American States in Washington, D.C. And it was literally like this CSR guy from Barrick and like this the VP of their Latin American operations and this image consultant. Um, and they were talking about CSR, corporate social responsibility in a time of crisis. And like Barrick was the poster child for corporate social responsibility. Like the whole thing just was like so disgusting. And this meeting was paid for by CETA. And anyways, the chapter kind
Wow.
of goes into so much grossness, and I can't even explain it all because my chapter is actually very dense. And I name names and I pull a lot of examples of how, the Munk Center for International Studies and then the Munk School, with the next director of the Munk School, Janice Stein, um, just how they backed the mining company agenda at every turn. And so, anyways, the Building Canadian Advantage Harper report, it said, oh, instead of an ombudsperson, we're going to recommend that we have a CSR counselor. And the first CSR counselor that they named was Marquita Evans, who was the founder of the Devonshire Initiative and the director of the Monk's Center for International Studies. And so she became the person that was supposed to mediate, investigate. She was supposed to be the person that impacted communities went to for help. So it was just like so obscene. And then eventually it led, I would say that report led to the eventual dismantling of CETA itself.
Wow, which CETA itself also had a lot of issues when it comes to overthrowing other countries' governments and so forth. But that still is quite shocking.
Yeah.
That
And I say in the piece, I'm just like, okay, so CETA isn't great, but I mean, the fact that like it folded so that aid could be more explicitly aligned with Canada's foreign affairs agenda and trade agenda is just, I mean,
yeah.
it was worse. And so anyways, they gave all this money, like over $26 million to all of these development NGOs that were working with the mining companies. All of them were part of the Devonshire Initiative. They
So
got this
just doing free PR and propaganda for the mining companies then.
and CSR projects next to the mine sites. And so they were given this money to do, like build a school next to a mine site, that kind of stuff. And yeah, and so like everyone that participated in this Devonshire Initiative was greatly rewarded, and the the roundtables report wasn't forgotten. In fact, there was this liberal MP who like won the lottery to submit a private members bill, and so he kind of codified the roundtable's recommendations into a private members bill. It was like not exactly what everyone wanted because it couldn't have a budget associated with it, so it really just kind of found other ways around kind of implementing those recommendations. And this was a time when the Liberal Party and the NDP had a majority in Parliament when put together. And the Liberal Party leader uh, was telling people not to vote for the bill, like the Liberal whip. It was reported. It was a rumor.
Was and which
No, it's not him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wow, that's unbelievable. That's so shocking then. And then, but then in closing, then, I wanted then, your response, briefly to this, which is, I don't know if you saw the documentary, Planet of the Humans, which was very critical of green groups and the so-called green solution to climate change. They said that a lot of, renewables, like solar panels and whatnot, comes from mining and whatnot. So I wanted, what's your response to that, given, somebody like Elon Musk, he was bragging about the Western-backed coup that happened in Bolivia that saw for a brief period a Christian fascist regime in power. And Elon Musk, when he was confronted about that, he said, "Well, we coup what we want." So I wanted your response to that, because that's sort of solar panels and stuff like that. That was sort of seen as like our alternative to get off of fossil fuels, and I imagine mining companies. But then if you have this kind of greenwashing, I'm just curious, like, what's the alternative then? And should we just continue on with the kind of green transition off of fossil fuels and so forth, even though I guess the planet is still going to die, but we might just give its lungs a little more, just a few more decades maybe, or
I mean, I think that the answer, is a lot more justice within the mining industry. I mean, obviously, there's these, critical minerals for the green transition, or there's, gold, which, I haven't looked recently, but up, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, was the most like explored for and mined mineral, or precious metal, gold, something that we don't even need for anything, right? Something that, 11% is used for anything other than jewelry or investment, and we get 37% from recycled sources. So, you know, there is so much mining that takes place that is not even close to critical. And that mining, which you could like make a case that's necessary, well then let's empower the local community to get what they need to do this mining in a responsible way. I'm not saying that it can't exist, that there is enough cleanup. We just need to look at this industry honestly. We need to look at this industry and say we are going to destroy the water. This is going to be, to a certain extent, like there's going to be a lot that's damaged from this. And let's see how much we can do to like make sure that the local community can plan around that, water treatment plants, um, a closure bond for when the mineral runs out, these sorts of things. Um, even like in Papua New Guinea, like one of the main demands of the community for years has been resettlement away from the mine site. I mean, they don't want to just be displaced. They want to be resettled. So, they want to not just land, but land with roads in it, a hospital, a school, and then they'll move. They'll move to that other land and they'll give you the land with all the gold in it. Like, there's so little justice in this industry. There's so little power given to the communities that are directly impacted by it, and so, we need to just mine, you know, like the future, is mining with justice. I mean, we wouldn't be in the all the problems that we're in today, you know, if it wasn't for the biggest contradiction of our time, which is this era of cheap energy, right? And it's because we have been extracting resources as if the goal was to extract resources as quickly and cheaply as possible. We need to slow the F down, right? I mean, I don't know about cussing on your show. Like, just thought
you can
myself.
cuss, it's all right. But yeah, yeah.
But like, and we need to use way less energy, right? And that's where the real savings are, And so, like, yeah, do I think solar panels? They're probably part of the solution. It's like, yeah, but that's beside the point. I mean, if we're talking about mining, how is that mining taking place? And, and then if we're talking about, energy consumption, like we need to really center the conversation around using less energy, and not, create these kind of like, oh, you can't be against gold. You have gold in your computer. Like, like let's just be,
or laptops and cell phones and whatnot. Yeah.
yeah. I just think it's really important that we're honest with the fact that, any mining is going to destroy the environment. And how are we going to do that in a way, where we kind of honor the sacrifice and use it for something that's good? And, I would think that solar panels are better than using it for, like, I mean, it really depends what the solar panels are powering, I guess. I mean, like, solar powering a mine for gold or something like that,
Yeah.
um not the best. And maybe we should look at, wind in a lot more places and other types of mining, but all of it takes mining. I mean, there's a thing that says if it's not grown, it's mined. um and that's a saying that the is oft repeated within the mining industry. But we just need to be looking at what we're doing, and do it with a lot more justice. And there's really not simple, but um, there are some obvious changes, such as free, free, prior, and informed, and ongoing consent, um, that would not only slow us down a lot, but also make sure that what we're doing is has more justice in it.
Yeah. Well, we usually end the program now with a questionnaire done by Marcel Proust, later the French broadcaster Bernard Pivot, and later James Lipton of Inside the Actor Studio. So just before you go off to your next appointment, and I apologize in advance for making you late. So Ms. Saunders, here you go, and don't worry, it's just very quick one word answers. So let's do this. So Ms. Saunders, what's your favorite words?
Hubris.
What's your least favorite words?
We reject it. They're like, no. Actually.
I don't know. I don't like cynicism.
Okay, and what turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Um,
I like them both.
what turns me on? I mean, I really love good political art.
Okay, and then what turns you off then?
What turns me off? I mean, I'll just say cynicism again.
Okay,
That like I know so much, and I love, I do love some cynical people, I have to say.
like
You know,
George Carlin.
I really do. I just, uh, I just kind of hate the attitude of when knowledge becomes something that actually like is harmful.
And then what's your favorite curse words?
I mean, not harmful, but like you know what I'm saying. Like
Yeah.
just like somebody to not try. Um, my favorite curse words. I don't know. Fuck.
All right. What sound noise do you love? Followed by what sound noise do you hate?
Well, I hate the sound of police.
Oh, that's a good one. And then what sound noise do you love then?
I don't know. Probably the one that is like you won.
And then what profession, if you weren't doing yours, would you love to attempt to do? Followed by what profession would you absolutely not want to do under any circumstances?
I've always wanted to pursue a career in law, actually, which is pretty funny.
You would have been
Uh,
a good lawyer.
yeah, I mean, I just have kids, so it's hard. Um, you know, uh, but not impossible. I've seen many people that I admire do that. Um, and what career would I never do? I mean, I'd never uh, work for a mining company.
And then final one. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
It was all a test.
All right, I'll take that. All right, well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1 with Sakura Saunders, an incredible activist involved with such superb organizations like Mining Injustice Solidarity Network, the Beehive Collective, and protestbarrik.org, and contributor to the new book, which is on my list of books to get, Capitalism and Dispossession, Corporate Canada at Home and Abroad. Ms. Saunders, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to have you back on again as a regular. Keep up with the great work you do, and you have all my love and the very best. And I'll make sure to link to all of those websites that you're involved in. Once the recording is done, this goes on YouTube.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. Bye-bye. Baby's calling.
Ciao. Yeah, ciao, till then.